thinking of DAOs, what's most fascinating to you?
I think mostly the fact that people are using them in different ways.
Okay.
Why
is this fascinating?
I mean, there's no real way to use it. And if we're seeing, like people being creative with how we leverage decentralized coordination, a long time ago, was sort of at the stage where we're just trying to spark imagination, right, of how DAOs can be used. And I think people are starting to sort of drop like why DAOs are needed and, why decentralized coordination matters.
I mean, what I'd like to highlight again is there is this aspect of reinventing the firm. So come up with new organizations to collaborate. And this is pretty practical. So it's non-hierarchical, it's permissionless. You sometimes have even elements of video games and levels, credits to achieve a certain status. Then compensation, rewards are a big topic today. And then Felipe, just in the recent talk, talked about optimizing intimacy. So also new ways to get together around a certain purpose. Sometimes, being stressed out by collaboration. We also experience this in token engineering with so many different disciplines coming together and so many domain jargons. So this is one element. Is this what you think about if you say that people use it and that DAOs exist? Is it about these new forms of collaboration?
Yes, in short, but I don't think we've organized ourselves in decentralized means for a very long time, and the funny thing is that centralized entities, at least, only really I guess it's like I would say that it's nothing new. It's just that like crypto enables us to create more fluid ownership models, whether distributed, more fluid governance models, where there's greater participation, expression from a community. How you would actually run them, you can run them very differently. But I think I think what doesn't change is what doesn't change other things that are sort of the pillars of what makes a functional organization. I think that organizations inherently don't change, but by factor of the new ownership models, new incentive models, new governance models, we might see many more different types of organizations than the ones we've seen before. There's still the core pillars that made really great equity organizations or centralized organizations or equity companies, traditional companies, still all completely apply to decentralized organizations. At least that's what I'm seeing. And, because DAOs, I'm seeing a lot of DAOs, start off really decentralized, as in I would even not even say it, I would say they would start off with decentralized ownership and governance models, but but they also try to really they sort of throw the baby out with the bathwater, where they're also trying to discard sort of centralized operating models, which actually sort of really work. It's sort of I think the sort of pattern that I'm seeing emerge is governance and ownership is decentralized, but leadership is re-centralizing. And then you sort of need that. And you not only re-centralizing, but leadership is the full extent of what leadership looks like in DAOs is being explored. And I think that you can have decentralized leadership that sort of comes after having really effective central leadership.
That's interesting. Maybe we can jump to progressive decentralization here. And this is, I think, a term that's used quite frequently. You say centralized leadership. Can you elaborate on that? So first, I would like to ask, do you agree on, okay, a progressive decentralization is the way to go for DAOs?
Yes, but not in the way everyone has been really understanding it.
Okay.
So I don't think it's a linear progress from like super, like, so for like, I think how people understand it right now is that, you take a very closed organization or centrally run organization, and then you sort of like, over time, like, you just like let go of control and you give responsibilities over to the community in a very linear fashion. Like that, I think instead what happens is it's more like, yes, or when you zoom out, it is like this progressive decentralizing, decision-making, decentralization of responsibilities, decentralization of, operational, focuses, from biz dev, governance, even product development, over time. Some aspects are harder to decentralize than others, right? But like, instead of like this being a linear journey, what I'm starting to see is that, to build really, to functionally decentralize these communities, it needs to be more of an iterative loop where, you're sort of actually, building up decentralized capabilities, one at a time or progressively. So what this may look like is, instead of like one long journey, slowly like fades into decentralization, you're actually, I think, decentralizing one, like, or giving a community one responsibility at a time and making sure it can, like take ownership of that effectively. And then, over time, you're progressively increasing the responsibilities and capabilities of a decentralized or community run organization. And the thing is, you need to be able to, build, like, assess what the capabilities and responsibilities you're trying to like really design and implement into a community organization, but you will never know whether that is successful or not if you never step away, right? So I'm starting to see that, like, but the issue is that you need to, oftentimes you don't get this right. You never get it right on your first try, but you will never know if you don't know, if you don't step away. So I'm starting to see this pattern where core founding teams are actually, building up these decentralized organizations, stepping away, but actually needing to step back in to, actually, after they've assessed like the success of the, decentralization of a certain responsibility. This doesn't even apply to the whole organization even, right? This might even apply to one component, and I think, like, once you assess, you come in and try to resolve, the implementation of something that's been ineffective, or you try to increase the scope and build up internal capabilities again. And then only, like, I think, over time you repeat this process. But I think it's also like, there's I learned this from Felix from SAT Protocol. We were chatting about, Index Corp, and really, organizations not only need to, great organizations aren't just organizations that do the same thing over and over again. The ones that can, self-assess and identify, like, whether it's doing is successful or not. They're also organizations that are able to be proactive, think about how they can do things better. And also organizations that can innovate, create new solutions, have the flexibility to invent new things, right? They're like creative organizations. So, like, you'd consider, like, as Index 2.0 is emerging, it's developing this leadership group that's like, the wise owl, sort of this delegation of all the working groups, which is supposed to be acting like a leadership buddy. He sort of describes it as like, Index 1.0 was a very stagnant, organization. It wasn't really able to self-assess. It was not able to identify bottlenecks and improve. And they needed that leadership body. So, like, and it doesn't make sense that for a core team to step away. I mean, I think the core team, the team that's there in the beginning, oftentimes, where they're building up this organization, that's still going to be the most effective unit and leadership body in this, or in the network, for a very long time. And I think that the balance is like, these bodies want to basically, incrementally increase the scope of like what they're trying to achieve with the decentralized body, improve the maturity of its capabilities, like, from like just stagnant to proactive to innovative, And you know, like over time, yeah, just like, you know, like step in, implement things, fix things, step back and repeat. And it's a slow progression from, you know, like a stagnant to like a fully functioning but also proactive and like creative organization.
Yeah, right. By the way, everyone in the audience, feel free to drop in your questions and things you'd like to comment on. We are happy to give you the stage and jump in, fishbowl style. Here, I mean, it's interesting that you say, okay, there is a founding team, and they kind of define the scope. They define when the community is mature enough, sounds like, to take over. Of course, I mean, there is this other position saying, wait, the whole idea and the big opportunity for decentralized organizations is that we don't have this centralized planning, that people can come up proactively with their ideas on how to improve and how to make progress towards a certain purpose. And I think you also had this in your talk, a self-signal, right? Self-signal
so here's
to
the thing,
contribute.
you know, like this core team doesn't need to be like the founding team, I guess. Like it can be it can be the internal community actually self-organizing, but you do 100% need a planning body. You know, these DAOs without like, you know, like and eventually, like, you know, I think DAOs will effectively need like capabilities, like a group that's purely focused on assessing the outcomes produced, improving it. In every community, at least early stage ones, it's pretty like naive to think that this will emerge by itself. This itself even needs to be built up. And yeah, like whatever works. I wouldn't force like my point being is that you want to incrementally like increase the responsibilities of a group, like not go from like zero to 100 from day one.
Yeah, I mean, this assessment is I think it's a very rich thing. We in this research group discussed over the last couple of weeks how to define KPIs, how to measure network healthiness, how to find indicators if a DAO is on the right track. And then, of course, you could say, can we have certain metrics? I mean, the simplest way to measure an ecosystem's value, of course, is the token value. But I think, of course, this is not the full truth, right? I just wanted to say it's a trap. Like people are looking at the token value or token price, and then trying to in early stage and trying to define an ecosystem's value via that. Even though I think it is, in fact, has an impact on DAO contributors, because I mean, first and foremost, increasing token value is much more attractive for any kind of attracting talents, for attracting contributors. But let's put this aside. What I want to discuss
to that point. So, like, no one wants to create a non-valuable network. First of all,
sure.
You know, but I also agree that, you know, like optimizing for price as a first order, like optimization doesn't make a lot of sense, because price is usually a lagging indicator of what you've built and what you're creating.
100%. If there are no other indicators, though, people tend to take this as a metric, and that can be dangerous. And there's more to it on this, how to steer or how to verify if a DAO is on the right track. I mean, ideally, we have a very clear purpose of a DAO, but then people need to break this down into certain objectives. And then we, from a token engineering point of view, we also try to design the mechanisms in a way that it's, for example, robust, or that we can optimize and steer in the right direction. And here we can use and apply control theories where you have certain indicators in the system, sensors, to measure and observe the system. And then you could even have autonomous, automatic reactions of the systems to stabilize them or to optimize in a certain direction and to adapt incentives in a way like dynamic fees work. And then the big question though is, what are the sensors and what are the indicators? And it's quite, I think really there's a challenge in setting out objectives, and we have to be really careful with coming up with metrics. We had a great discussion yesterday where we closed with the hypothesis that probably there are metrics, but it's much more likely that it makes sense to have local metrics, like in a certain work stream, or temporary metrics that matter. I'm struggling a little bit with the centralized assessment, but there is certainly a challenge in how to coordinate, how to steer activities, and how to verify if an ecosystem is on the right track.
Yeah, I think it's pretty simple. I think you assign, like when you put these groups together, like at the very start, you have goals and, you have places you have the starting points, and you break, the journey from starting point to the end goals down, right? And I think like it makes sense to really like with those intermediate goals be very, they should be, achievable, realistic, time sensitive, scoped out, right? And I think, how you assess them is really, just like by, there's a sort of like emergence of like season-based like planning. We are planning, like whether, you're really when you're designing a season, it's just the time-boxed time period where you're trying to achieve a set of goals. And, like I think designing a system that, measures all of this, is great. But that's pretty hard to like actually design from day one. So to be 100%. To be like really practical, like just want to like do something, assess whether it works, and repeat that loop. And I think if you can increase the efficiency of how you can assess that and measure it, right, the better. And I think I would think that would probably emerge over time as the mechanisms of like as certain mechanisms in terms of like incentivizing contributions or network metrics become clearer. But I think you always generally want to like be very iterative, be highly flexible, especially when you're implementing anything new, right? And it's always like walk before you run. And I think the current model of season-based design is like sort of interesting because it's like almost like the left side of the IQ bell curve way of doing things. It's just like, let's like all like come together, decide what we want to achieve, work on, delegate, tasks and responsibilities. And all right, off we go. And then at the end of it, it's just like looking, did we achieve what we wanted to achieve from like, the actual objectives to like, are we working towards a higher goal? And a lot of the, the funny thing is like, for example, Forefront, it's not even like an immediate like touch and go of like, we've done finish the season, let's do another one. Like taking like, almost like 1 to 2 months to just like plan out the next one and also set up the necessary processes to coordinate the next season, right? So like, I think in the first season, like when you take this iterative approach and you increase your scope of what you want to achieve slowly, you understand like, you slowly expose yourself to more and more like coordination challenges and that you need to address. And I think like in between seasons, that's where you sort of implement them, and it's sort of like, it's like the social coordination infrastructure, whether it's, systems, whether it's new metrics, whether it's new working groups, whether it's new incentive programs. I think, you sort of have to like really carefully design those. And I think only over time can you sort of like go from like a crawling to a walking pace to like maybe running at full steam, right? Where like, you have this complex machine of contributors and network participants. They're all measured, we know what, whether we're moving on the right track or not. But I think to get there is sort of like a slow crawl. And things usually, it's sort of the bootstrapping phase, so that's what I'm seeing across a lot of DAOs right now. And I think self-assessment is super, super critical because, and like, I guess we're starting simple, right?
There's Peter with a related question. Peter, do you want to switch on
Yeah,
your
sure.
mic and ask yourself?
Yeah. So maybe back to the previous topic of progressive decentralization a little bit, but I was curious how you would suggest, or maybe what you've seen work in the past for getting communities to take on responsibility and progressively decentralize. Obviously, you could do rewards mechanisms or create incentive structures, but there's also benefits to decentralization. So are the rewards mechanisms or incentive structures enough, or would the benefits of decentralization, are the reward systems required, or are the benefits of decentralization enough?
It depends, like, what do you exactly mean in terms of, like, what are you looking to achieve, like, by leveraging decentralization, like, in that context?
Well, so you mentioned decentralizing decision-making, and I think there can be benefits to doing that in terms of making better decisions for the group, driving towards common values and goals. So yeah, decision-making could be one of them.
Yeah. Yeah, sorry, I don't actually understand the question.
Yes, well, so if you do have like a centralized group that's making decisions, making the call for a community, and they are hoping to progressively decentralize, hand off responsibility to the community, is there always a requirement? Is it always required that they create some sort of, like, maybe financial incentive for the community members to start participating, or would
not necessarily. I think like, it's sort of, you can sort of think of like the progressive decentralization of a central, like, centrally coordinated or closed organization as like a whole list of all the decisions that ever makes inside the organization, right? And then sort of like and if you zoom in on even one of them, you have to assess, like, who usually makes this decision, what are all the factors that like, what are all the data inputs, almost, right, that needs to be considered to make that decision. Who, like, what are the necessary considerations, or viewpoints or disciplines or competencies that need to be present in making that decision, right? Because, like, not all decisions should be made by everyone. So just because you have a community of people sort of who can coordinate doesn't mean they're able to actually make certain decisions. For example, like, a lot of the security practices of, like, say, DeFi protocols are still, like, governed and, like, mostly not governed, I would say, but driven by the core team, because there's no one, maybe there's like a token holder community that can really, govern, say, liquidity incentives, but there's no competency for security practices, right? So how do you decentralize that, or, like, distribute that to the community over time? I think you have to really set not only incentives, it's really about, firstly, setting up a decision-making framework, for that very decision itself. And then you have to really, break down what would make sense, what's necessary, who should ideally be making these decisions. And then, I think leveraging incentives to really attract, like, as anchor, like, participation there. But I think that, the team, as example, like, even if they set up this framework, they need to test whether this, like, framework, and maybe if the incentives actually produce the right decisions, right? Because it makes no sense for something so critical, right, such as security, to be just, like, thrown out there without actually being iterated on, tested on. And security is, like, one aspect, right? You can think of, like, literally all the decisions of an organization, from HR to marketing to biz dev, like, who should be making these decisions. And I think it's, like, about creating, like, implementing frameworks slowly, one by one. So I think it's not only incentives. I think it's, like, frameworks, and you have to sort of iterate on that.
I think it also depends if we're talking about services to the DAO, like the organizational or operational body, and innovation, growing the ecosystem. I think this can work pretty different, because I agree that security-related work streams or units in a DAO, you have to treat this with care, of course, because basically it's protecting everyone, while for the innovative part, for the progressing the DAO, the mission, I think there must be different mechanisms and rewards in place, right?
Yeah, again, I picked out something hyper specific so I can outline the fact that like it's not all about this, just like how communities aren't about including everyone. Not all decisions should be, like even missions, values, should not be influenced by everyone. They should be influenced by the community members that add the most value to it. At least that's my opinion. A token holder that's never added value and someone who doesn't have context should not be influencing that.
Is there any way, maybe let's come back to your article. There you outlined a 3-step process of developing a community. And then let me quickly pull it up. So the first step is creating opportunities for people to discover the community and project. The second is creating ways for people to get involved meaningfully. And the third step is creating opportunities for participants to build a sense of ownership. And I think only in the last step, you mention long-term token incentives. Okay, there are many, many aspects here. I think you mentioned also minimum viable contribution. How does this relate to this? Okay, first, you kind of, any member, any decision maker should prove if he or she is able to take a decision. This sounds like. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, it's sort of like you need actual, let's say, you're running a DeFi protocol. You need all sorts of stakeholders from, people who understand, how to govern the DeFi protocol to, other areas that you want to decentralize, operational ones for that, right? Yeah, and it's like you need to attract like users, you need to attract contributors, but at the same time, understand like, you're actually, leveraging them effectively. I think that the balance here is like, before I was really talking about the progressive like decentralization of the responsibilities. Here it's like once you've actually decided, you should actually still like the core original group should actually still be involved until the internal capabilities have been built. That's why I talked about the iteration, right? So you would never like just, I would never, you like a core team would never like just set up like a working group to like develop leadership without making sure it's effective first. So it's like all about like I don't really I think that you always want to build like competent, effective organizations first, and then like and then everything else falls from that. And like I think the thing about like attracting contributors is that you want to create even with contributors, it's like you want to attract them with opportunities where they can add to the community, but in ways in which you can vet, and also like ideally the low risk ones. And once the contributors are vetted for the competency, the capabilities, you're likely as a community, not only as a core team, but like all the leaders of a working group, you're able to probably give them higher risk responsibilities where there is no margin of error, right? Or and so on. So I think like in the beginning, you never you want to attract people with opportunities, give them a chance to prove themselves, but you never like it's unlikely you're going to bring them into something super mission critical where everything is dependent on an anon, right? Like that's been in the community for one day, right? So they may eventually build up a credibility and prove themselves over time, but I think there's a reason why like you start off with like competency first and efficient and operational efficiency, and then sort of you understand whether you can open that up, right? Yeah.
Livy is adding to the chat, how to find experts. Livy, would you like to jump in here?
Sure. Yeah. I think there was just Jess was also sharing some things about hierarchies and how sometimes the expertise is needed to make a field decision. But I've been questioning a lot, like how can we even identify expertise, and how it feels like we're moving from like traditional systems that had highly academic points of view for expertise, like you needed to have certain titles and have completed certain processes to be able to have a say in something. And I'm wondering if, like, now in this highly experimentative field we're in, isn't curiosity enough to allow someone to participate in a decision?
No, I think that, I think that, like, yes, there's this, chance that, you create this exclusivity, but I think that, I'm really talking about the hard boundaries and like the parameters here. Really the devil's in the details, very, very on a very high level, you want the smartest people and the most competent people to come together, right? And you're leveraging, ownership, like token ownership as a means of retaining that talent. And the idea with like attracting the smartest and brightest is that so you can bet, together the network can produce something much better. You can produce a better product, better service, better network, better outcomes. The better, whichever organization, whether centralized or decentralized, that provides a better, something XYZ will win. And so like, I think the devil's in the details of how you actually, execute this, right? So it's like, you need to balance of like, you need to build a competent organization, or not only competent, but you need to build something, an organization that produces something, truly, useful, novel, special. And, that's why, like decentralized coordination is great. Basically, the idea is like, you shouldn't be using decentralized coordination unless you're creating something very unique. That's something that would otherwise would not really be able to exist, right? With central, like, coordination mechanisms. And yeah, like, and it's like, I think that, yeah, like there's a pitfall, like, if we curate, yeah, but I think that in the end, the better network wins. And the better network is the one that produces a better service, better product, better outcome, better, cheaper, more liquidity, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And however you actually leverage, your coordination or community building mechanisms, to achieve that, whatever works. And I think that how you achieve really great decentralized organizations by like by having like competent like decision making and like having really great talent retained. Yeah. And like how you operate, is sort of, it's up to you. But in my personal experiences and like coordinating DAOs, yeah, like, I would never sacrifice like, the product over pure like participation. I'd rather, if I can produce a better outcome with 4 people in a working group, over like coordinating, 20 or 30 more people and producing a more mediocre outcome, I would pick the 4-person group, of course, right? Like this, but, like, I think the idea with like encouraging participation is that with, the right people that you attract and the right curation, you're able to like enable the right people to like participate in a more open fashion.
I realized that the question of participation, inclusivity is sparking of a lot of discussion in the YouTube. Let me check the comments here. First is, okay, can you give an example of a good process to make it tangible? Identifying talent. Not every talent has a huge track record. And we have seen this, no matter if we're talking about Web2 startups or Web3 DAOs. So how could a good journey of personal growth look like in a DAO or in any organization from your point of view?
I think really, firstly, just observing the whole organization and what it's trying to do, understanding its goals, understanding, its current challenges and problems it's trying to solve. If it's like running, the DAO in a season-based program, understanding the current season and like maybe and I think that's up to really the DAO and like providing, easy, accessible opportunities to just like for new beginners to jump and get involved. And I wouldn't say new beginners of anyone. Like, I don't think DAO should onboard everyone. I think DAO should be onboarding, like the key stakeholders that are important for the future success of the network, right? It's like, it's like about onboarding people that are able to like really contribute. And like people who are able to contribute and add value, it's like subjective, like, and I think it's up to the DAO to really like be flexible with like how it decides that, but generally speaking, it's like, I think really getting a lay of the land. And then I think it's up to the DAO to provide like easy, accessible ways to get involved, right? And I think one mechanism that's always worked is like the resident Sherpa, where like, this, I think before you really have great understanding, of like, what are your needs? Oftentimes it's just like this, person who's like running like either onboarding calls for new contributors, right? Or doing one-on-one calls with new community members who want to contribute. And they're really, I think that it's like all about assessing, the goals of the individual community member who's new to the community, what they can contribute, what they want to contribute, what the goals are, and understanding if there's a fit, and really positioning them in the different in the DAO, accordingly, right? So I think like in reality, I think it's like as a individual contributor, it's like life is tough for you because most DAOs suck with this, but and it's still pretty primitive, but as a DAO, I think to onboard new contributors, you have to really understand who are the people you want and need, and how do you create easy ways for those stakeholder like types to really engage, right? So like if it was, let's say, people, let's say, you want to decentralize, let's say, you want to decentralize like product development, right? Let's say, like the development of front ends, you might, something simple is just making sure like other like basic things that front end developers can like contribute to.
Let's take this example. It's great.
Yeah.
Product development, how to decentralize this.
There's different ways to, decentralize product development, right? Like, depends what you're trying to achieve, because like, let's say, like, it depends on the scope. I think the products, like, are you trying to, like, product development of interface is very, decentralizing that is very different to product development of a core protocol, which is a much bigger scope, right? So, or even like development of like, projects that are built on top of something. So it's like, and then there's different like coordinate mechanisms to do that, right? It's bounties, there's like even like ways to coordinate ecosystem of projects on top of something else, right? And that's sort of done maybe with like a quadratic funding entire landscape of projects to build on top of something, right? So like, that's sort of getting into the weeds, but yeah, like.
Let me check the questions on the YouTube.
Yeah.
Peter, go.
Oh yeah, I was just going to read one out from YouTube too. So one of the benefits of having these open communities is that people have the opportunity to join and hopefully realize some of their own goals and start contributing out of their own initiative. So if that's the case, they might not always have the skills required to participate right away. So what do you think about helping the how do you create more experts? If you want more experts that are able to contribute and add a lot of value, how do you create more?
So there's two things. So one thing in your point, like, is like sort of getting people, like there's certain focuses and what if they fit outside the focus? And the second point is like, like you mentioned, like, okay, like how do you create more experts? Sort of separate, but like in the first point, it's like, it's up to a DAO really. Most DAOs are very accepting because they lack contributors. Let's say a lot of the DAOs in the space, it's like what they need is contributors and human capital, right? But let's say I've definitely come across DAOs where they need, like, they actually have a sufficient amount of contributors, and the bottleneck of the organization is actually in this particular type of contributor, right? So it's like so different DAOs can have priorities of like the different types of contributors. And it can onboard others, but that's a matter for the DAO to really decide of like how much it wants to dilute its focus, right? Maybe it doesn't dilute its focus. Maybe, most DAOs have like, pretty, open ways for people to like suggest ideas of how to contribute. But I think, if you're really, ruthlessly efficient about producing a better outcome as a network, which I think like, you do have to like identify key priorities and sort of assess accordingly. And regarding like, experts, I think, that's part of the internal, like, I think that's another key process of like community coordination, right? Like it's making sure, people are educated on important piece of context, whether that's on a like working group, inter working group level to like an overall community member level, right? And people are not only like educated, but they're able to access, they're being able to follow the most important details, announcements, news, decisions of that organization and initiatives of that organization, day to day, week to week, without feeling like, missing out on that information, right? Without diluting the focus. So I think like, with community coordination, it's like, let's say you sort of design like, okay, this network is going to achieve X, Y, Z, but like I would say community coordination is let's say you design a network, it's like coordination achieving X, Y, Z. We need X, Y, Z, stakeholders involved. I would say community coordination is like sort of the act of bringing those stakeholders together to coordinate on that shared goal, right? And there's sort of different components needed to functionally execute, from designing, and I would all bucket this under community coordination or community development, which is I think is like, firstly, it's like developing the culture and leadership of like an organization, like culture, values, defining that, making sure that the actual goals of the organization are clear and everyone understands it, it's and so on. I'd probably call that leadership. There's probably, the actual, development of, I would actually say that probably like the contributor funnel. It's like making sure that you actually have the sufficient like human capital needed to drive towards your end goals. It's like building contributor funnels, making sure they feel aligned, making sure they're able to like the necessary stakeholders that come in this community are able to like actually contribute easily, right? It's like onboarding, it's like all of this. And then there's probably the third point is probably, organizational like communications. It's making sure people are educated on the most important things, on an overarching level, or even in an individual working group, like the product development working group. They need to know, a certain set of context, right, to operate effectively. That's important. And so like all the way to like, so like this could be documentation. This could be a group, like a DAO newsletter that covers everything. This could be, and so on. So like, there's like communications at different levels, right? And then there's probably like organizational design, which is designing, how the organization works together, designing, things like long-term incentives. It's designing probably, I think, something else. I sort of wrote this down somewhere before, but a few other points, but I think if you sort of break down like community coordination, there's sort of different buckets that enable like effective execution of the end vision, that is the token network, right? And it is like, that is the quintessential like challenge. It's like, how do you coordinate all of this effectively? But you need to consider leadership, you need to consider, talent and growth of the contributor community. You need to also consider communications and education. You need to consider how the organization overall is structured and designed.